Hey creatives, and welcome to Magical, Mystical, Mythical Monday. If we have never met before, my name's Kim and I'm a creative freelancer with a passion for film and the written word. And if we have met, welcome back. And on today's Magical, Mystical, Mythical Monday, we're talking what are the key elements of Gothic romance and why the heck does it belong on Magical, Mystical, Mythical Monday? Let's get started. Alright guys, so I love all forms of literature and film. I have a soft spot for Gothic romance because one of the very first books I ever read was Bram Stoker's Dracula. I know what you're saying, really? Like, how old were you? I was pretty young when I read it and have read it since several different times, but I fell in love with the world that it created. And so, on top of the fact I was already a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe, it just grabbed me and I never let go. I enveloped everything I could that was Gothic romance. And so I think Gothic romance, the genre, has kind of fallen out of terminology. A lot of the times nowadays it gets lumped in with horror or supernatural, and we don't see a lot of those period pieces, or as much as was prevalent. They're not as popular, maybe that's what I should say. So I thought, let's talk about it. Let me share my love of this genre with you, and I'll give you 5 elements that will help you create, if you're looking to create, a Gothic romance story. And the thing is, guys, Gothic romance tended to be set in the 18 and 1900s, but you could use these elements and put them in with steampunk, which, by the way, if you don't know what it is, I did a video about it. I will link it up in a card here. And honestly, guys, you could use the elements and place them wherever you want. And yeah, it would be better if it was in the Victorian age, but you know, art is art and you put it where you want to put it. So let's talk a little about the actual definition first, so you can understand what it is. So if you look up the definition in the dictionary, it is a romance that has to do with the grotesque, the macabre, or the supernatural. And like I said, it was super popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s. You know, you had of course, Dracula, you had Frankenstein, your Picture of Dorian Gray, poetry by Poe. Annabel Lee is a prime example of Gothic romance. Those are some of the examples. So let's talk about what elements make it a Gothic romance. And we're going to start with number 1, and that is a psychological issue. I'm going to use the word issue. So basically what that means is either the character or something that's going on in his life is causing a sanity break. Honestly, the best example for most of the elements that I'm giving is going to be Picture of Dorian Gray. So there is a psychological portion of that story. He has psychological issues. There are people around him that have psychological issues. There's a lot of different things. You know, if I go into even using Frankenstein as an example, the doctor himself is obsessed. And where obsession can be good in some ways, when you push it to the point where he pushed it, it then breaks that little taboo of morality and it becomes a psychological issue. He was obsessed with doing this. He was obsessed with creating this character, and it didn't matter what was going on. There is always an element of that psychological. Now, it doesn't have to be obsession. It could be whatever psychological issue you want to play with, but that element needs to be in there. And because that leads me into my number 2 element, which is the Gothic hero, which has kind of fallen out of terminology and is more nowadays called the anti-hero. And so that is the main character maybe is not like the classical example of what a hero would be. Maybe he isn't like super moral or super righteous. There's flaws within his character, and that in some ways makes him more, you can identify with him more. The Gothic hero is the classic anti-hero. He is the one that maybe, like, he's the bad boy with the heart of gold, or the things he's doing is wrong, but he's doing them for the right reasons. You know, all of that ties in to creating the anti-hero. So this aspect is quintessential Gothic romance. It is the crux and core. If you have none of the other elements, this one, as well as the psychological issue, needs to be part of the story. Simply because if it's not there, it's not gonna drive the story the way you would like to. You know, a good example of a modern book that did this, I just read a book called Stalking Jack the Ripper, and I cannot remember the author's name, so my apologies. I will make sure that I let you guys know, and I'll link to it down below. It's amazing. It's a modern book. It is a young adult novel. It is really well written, but it is very much a Gothic romance, and it's set during the time of Jack the Ripper. And so it's a good example of someone taking Gothic romance nowadays and utilizing it. And there's a couple other elements that it misses, but it definitely has the psychological it has the anti-hero, and it also has symbolism, which is my number 3 element. The use of symbolism in literature, and in particular right now I'm talking about Gothic romance and literature, but honestly, all of these things could translate over to film. Clearly, Dracula's been made 50,000 times, beaten to death. Frankenstein has been done 50,000 times, beaten to death. Picture of Dorian Gray has not been done as much, and I think that that's a tragedy, because it's a really good book. If you guys have never read it, check it out. All of the books I talk about I'll link down below. I'll create a little reading list for Gothic romance for you guys, and you guys can check it out. There'll be affiliate links, so thank you ahead of time for supporting the channel. I'll do like a little, I think going forward with a lot of these things, by the way, I think I'm gonna do like a little reading list at the bottom, and that'll be so that you guys can check out any of the books that I talk about or any of the movies I talk about. Let's move on. So symbolism is key in every type of art, whether it be painting, whether it be writing, whether it be film. So symbolism is very subtle in these books. Honestly, I'm not going to give you a lot of examples because sometimes I feel symbolism is relevant to the person that's reading the book. So it's almost like you're reading into what they're seeing. So what I find is symbolic may not be what you find is symbolic. So symbolism is something that is kind of individual. You will see the symbol that you want to see, and so that's why I'm not going to give examples, is because what I found symbolic may not be what you see, and that will defeat the purpose. So let's go ahead and move on to number 4, and number 4 is not prominent in every Gothic romance, but it is a key element in a lot of Gothic romance, and that is an emphasis on sexuality. Because in the time when it was super popular, they were very much repressed, and a lot of times repressed societies, when they do art to push the border, the artists will talk about the thing that is taboo, and talking about sex in the late 1800s, early 1900s was taboo. And so these authors and these artists would push their borders. So, and it's not like I'm walking around, you know, it's not like overtly sexual, but there is an emphasis on it. And so that is a key element. And like I said, that one is not prevalent in all Gothic romance, but it is prominent in a lot of them. That leads me to number 5, and probably the bane of my existence is that it is actually a mixture between supernatural and there are elements of supernatural and horror. And the reason that's a bane of my existence, not because I don't dig supernatural, because clearly I'm hugely into it, and it's not that I don't like horror, because I'm a huge fan of horror. It is because it has those elements, oftentimes it is categorized within those, even though it is its own genre. For example, when you go look for Bram Stoker's Dracula, you're probably going to find it in the horror section. If you go look for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you're going to find it in the horror section. If you go look for Dorian Gray, you're going to find it in a supernatural section. So because it has those tinges of it, it tends to be pushed out. But it has to be there. I know I said the 2, but there's actually 3. Like, it needs to have a supernatural horror tinge, it needs to have the anti-hero, and it most assuredly needs to have the psychological. The other 2, symbolism and emphasis on sexuality, those aren't necessarily having to be in there. They're just 5 elements that are prominent in the genre. All right, guys, so that is it. Those are the 5 elements that you can use to create that fantastic Gothic romance story you've been burning to create. And guys, in the comments below, leave me your favorite Gothic romance novel. And if you don't have one, have you ever seen a movie that you love that seemed to fall into the Gothic romance genre? And guys, just as a side note, my favorite Gothic romance in both Stoker's Dracula. Yeah, it's bomb, dude. The movie was Coppola, the book was Stoker, and I've read it 50,000 times, I swear. But guys, that's it. I hope this helped you out. If you have any other things you'd like me to research and kind of break down for you, leave those in the comments below. If you dug the video, give me a thumbs up. If you're digging on Magical, Mystical, Mythical Monday, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I do other contents 5 days a week. They're all different shows, but they are about film and the written word. And go ahead and head over and check out my blog. I also do a lot of great content over there as well. And until next time, creatives, safe journeys.